Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, welcome back to lecture number 17 of macroeconomics. We'll revise our previous lecture for a couple of minutes and then we'll proceed for today's class. Now, what we have learned in the previous class, we derived the LM curve by using liquidity preference theory. Now, what is liquidity preference theory? It is the basic model of interest rate determination. Interest rate is determined by using the money supply and the money demand by using liquidity preference theory. Here in this theory we take a money supply and price level as exogenous, it is given, and then increase in the money supply lowers the interest rate. We have also seen that whenever there is increase in the money supply, this reduces the interest rate in the economy. By using liquidity preference theory, we have derived we have the money demand curve, demand for real money balances curve, which is negatively sloped, and where we have seen that money demand is a function of rate of interest and income, and we have a negatively sloped money demand curve because the relationship between interest rate and the money demand is negative. अगर interest rate में इजाफा होता है तो money demand में कमी वाक़ई होती है, और अगर interest rate में कमी वाक़ई होती है तो money demand में इजाफा होता है. We have, as I said, that we assume that money supply and prices exogenous are given, so we vertical the money demand curve or the money supply curve. So where these two forces interact with each other, that determines the equilibrium in the money market. So हमने by using the demand for real money balances and by using the real money supply, real money supply balances, we have determined the equilibrium in the money market, and we said that the money market is in equilibrium where the demand for real balance is equal to demand for real money supply, right? So that determines the equilibrium level or equilibrium rate of interest in the money market and level of income in the money market, level of money supply and money demand in the money market. By using that liquidity preference theory, we have determined LM curve. LM curve basically is the curve which shows or tells us the combinations of R and Y that brings equilibrium in the money market, right? So हमने LM curve draw किया, and which was the positively sloped curve, and where we have a positive relationship between the rate of interest and income level in the money market. After that, we have combined these two curves, that is the LM curve and IS curve, which was basically derived in earlier lecture. तो दोनों को अगर हमने combine किया और हमने एक IS-LM model बनाया, और by combining these two IS and LM curve, these two curve give us a unique combination of R and Y that satisfies equilibrium in both of the market, that is the money market and goods market. After that, we analyze, we have did the policy analysis. If there is a change in either monetary policy or fiscal policy tools, so that affect the macroeconomic variable, which are here in this case interest rate and income level in the economy. तो हमने दोनों को separately भी करके देखा कि how each of the policy affect the level of income and interest rate in the economy, and then we have combined, we have interacted these two policies together and have seen that and have observed that if fiscal policy makers change their policy, and in response to that change monetary policy makers change their policy, there is a possibility of different responses. And then हमने ये भी देखा कि corresponding to each response there will be a different result. There will be a different effect on the rate of interest and income in the country. So this was all about the previous lecture. Now we'll come to today's lecture. We'll come to the second part of aggregate demand. We have completed the first part of aggregate demand, where we have derived IS curve and LM curve, and then we have combined these two curves and tries to determine the equilibrium in the goods market and the money markets with a unique combination of rate of interest and income. And then after that we have observed the changes in both of these two curves, or in the macroeconomic variable, by changing the monetary and fiscal policy tools and interacted in the same diagram. Now we'll come to the second part of aggregate demand, and where what we are going to learn in this part, how policies and shocks affect income and interest rate in the short run when prices are fixed. Now, as we know that prices are sticky, prices are stuck, are constant, are at predetermined level in the short run. Now we'll see that how policies and shocks affects the macroeconomic variables, which are here rate of interest and income in the economy. This is one of the objectives of today's class. Second, we would like to drive the aggregate demand curve. By after discussing these shocks, we'll drive the aggregate demand curve, and then at the end we will try to explore the various explanations or possibilities for the Great Depression, which was in 1929 to 1939. So it was in 30s, year of 30s. We'd like to see that. So what are the possible explanation of that Great Depression that came in US back in 1929? So these are the major contents that we would like to discuss in today's lecture. As I said that we are going to discuss in the first part of the lecture, we are going to discuss the shocks, how shocks affect the rate of interest and income in the country. Now since we have and we will try to discuss these shocks in the framework of ISM and LM model, right? Shocks in the ISM and LM model, where we try to see the effect of shock separately in each curve. First we will try to see how IS shocks in the goods market can affect the change in equilibrium in rate of interest and income, and then we'll see how the ILM shocks affect these macroeconomic variable. When we talk about IS shock, what it means? IS shock, investment saving curve shocks, mean exogenous changes in the demand for goods and services. Whenever there is a change in the demand for goods and services, this will bring a shock, a change in the goods market, right? What are the example of IS shocks? For example, stock market, if there is a boom in the stock market, or if there is a crash in the stock market, that will bring a change in the household wealth. Whenever there is a change in the household wealth, this will bring a change in consumption, right? So this is one of the example of IS shocks. The other possible example could be changes in business or consumer confidence or expectations, right? So whenever there is a change in business or consumer confidence or their expectations, this will bring a change in investment. And whenever there is a change in investment, this will bring a change in consumption, right? And consumption is one of the component of goods market equilibrium equation, right? So jab kabhi so whenever there is IS shocks, it means that shock is due to change in the demand for goods and services. And I have given you some of example. This shock could be possible due to change in the stock market. किसी वक्त जब स्टॉक मार्केट में अच्छे हालात होते हैं या बुरे हालात होते हैं, दैट इफेक्ट द वेल्थ ऑफ द हाउस होल्ड, उससे उनकी कंजम्पशन भी इफेक्ट होती है And similarly, एक दूसरी एग्जांपल हो सकती है कि जब there are good conditions or there is a change in business conditions or expectations of the household, this will change in investment, and that change will bring a change in consumption. So that is that kind of shocks are known as the IS shocks, are the shocks in goods market, which are due to exogenous changes in the demand for goods and services. What is LM shock? LM shock is the exogenous change in money demand and money supply. So whenever there is exogenous change in the demand for money, that is known as the LM shock. For example, a wave of credit fraud increases the demand for money. This could be a possible example, one of the example of changes in demand for money. And whenever there is a change in demand for money, that change is known as the LM shock. Another example could be more ATMs or the internet reduces money demand. If there are more internet machines, if there is internet facilities available to the customers, to the consumers, so this will reduce money demand. So LM shocks relates to change in money demand in the money market. IS shocks relates to change in the demand for goods and services in the goods market, right? So when are I have given you the example. So when are these shocks there in the economy, that disturbs the equilibrium in the goods market as well as in the money market, and we will discuss these shocks in terms of in the framework of IS and LM model. Now we'll try to, I will give you exercise. There is exercise for you. You are going to analyze shocks with IS and LM model. What is the exercise for you? Look at the slide. Use the IS-LM model to analyze the effect of, number one, a boom in the stock market makes consumer wealthier, right? So you need to observe how this shock affect the interest rate and income level in the economy. Number two, second question, after a wave of credit card fraud, consumers use more cash frequently in transactions. Now for each shock, use the IS-LM diagram to show the effects of these shocks on R and Y. Number two, determines what happens to consumption, investment and the unemployment rate. So this is the exercise for you कि आपने देखना क्या है कि आपने IS and LM मॉडल को यूज करना है और दो चीज़ों का इफेक्ट देखना है. One is the IS shock, when there is a boom in the stock market. There is the second shock is the LM shock, which is due to the credit card fraud and people use more money in transactions. So you need to see how it affects the rate of interest and income, and secondly, how it determines affect the consumption, investment and unemployment rate in the country. I will discuss a case study, especially with reference to US economy, and the US economic was slowed down in 2001. So first of all, I will tell you what happened in 2001, what are the factors, why economy was going down, and how it recovered by adopting the monetary and fiscal policies. Now what happened in 2001 in US economy, when there was economic slowdown, real GDP growth rate from 1994 to 2000 was 3.9 average, which is the average annual. Then it came down from 3.9% to 1.2% in 2001. So when the real GDP was coming down from 3.9% to 1.2%, it means there's economic slowdown in the US economy in 2001. Second effect क्या था slowdown का? The unemployment rate has increased from 4% to 5.8% in 2001. Now shocks that contributed to this slowdown. What were the shocks? How this happened? What were the responsible parameters, factors which bring slowdown in US economy? Number one, first shock was falling stock prices. There was a decline in stock prices from August 2000 to August 2001. There was a decline in stock prices by 25%, and week after that, when there was a 9/11 attack, there was a further decline in stock prices by 11%. So this shock was the highest shocks, right? So economic slowdown in US economy in the year 2000 was because of the highest shock, and that was because of the fall in stock prices. Number two, the terrorist attacks on 9/11. This increased uncertainty and fall in consumer and business confidence. Then both, so second factor, जब 9/11 का अटैक हुआ तो उससे अनसर्टेनिटी में इजाफा हो गया, और उससे जो इन्वेस्टर का कॉन्फिडेंस है, कंज्यूमर का जो कॉन्फिडेंस है इकोनॉमी पे, वो शेक हो गया, राइट? बोथ ऑफ दीज शॉक्स, फर्स्ट इज द स्टॉक प्राइसेस कम हुई, दूसरा जो अनसर्टेनिटी और कॉन्फिडेंस में कमी वाक़या हुई. बोथ शॉक रिड्यूस्ड स्पेंडिंग and shifted the IS curve to the left, right? So that is one of the best example of IS shock, right? तो ये हमने केस स्टडी को हम एनालाइज करें कि हमने ये कहा कि यूएस इकोनॉमी में 2001 में इकोनॉमिक स्लो डाउन हुआ. उस इकोनॉमिक स्लो डाउन की रीजंस क्या थी? फर्स्ट जो रीजन हमने देखी, दैट वाज द फॉल इन स्टॉक प्राइसेस, एंड सेकंड वाज द टेररिस्ट अटैक, 9/11 अटैक, जिसकी वजह से कॉन्फिडेंस में कमी वाक़ई हुई और अनसर्टेनिटी में इजाफा हुआ, और इससे इन दोनों शॉक्स की वजह से ओवरऑल स्पेंडिंग में कमी वाक़ई हुई. जब स्पेंडिंग में कमी वाक़ई हुई, गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग में कमी वाक़ई हुई, तो आईएस कर्व लेफ्टवर्ड शिफ्ट कर दी गया, राइट? हमने पिछले लेक्चर में देखा था कि जब स्पेंडिंग में इजाफा होता है तो आईएस कर्व राइटवर्ड शिफ्ट करता है, और जब स्पेंडिंग में कमी वाक़ई होती है तो आईएस कर्व लेफ्टवर्ड शिफ्ट करता है. आफ्टर दिस शॉक, what was the policy response from the government to recover from this economic slowdown? Of course, when there are shocks in the economy, in the country, right? When there is something wrong in the economy, government or policymaker responds to those shocks or to those fluctuations. Now, what was the response of US government or the policymaker in US of that economic slowdown? Number one, fiscal policy. Government has adopted fiscal policy, and then there was a large long-term tax cut. Immediately $300 rebate checks were given to the consumer, to the society. Number two, spending of the government were increased. Aid to New York City and the airline industry was given because of war on terror. This was the first policy response by the government. क्या किया उन्होंने इस शॉक से निकलने के लिए? Number one, there was large long-term tax cut. Number two, उन्होंने spendings बढ़ा दिए, special incentive दिए, special aid दी to the New York City जहाँ पे ये happening हुई थी, जहाँ पे ये attack हुआ था, to boost up the airline industry and to control, to reduce war, to reduce terrorism. Number two, on monetary policy side क्या किया US government ने? Federal government or Federal Bank, the Central Bank of US, they lowered its funds rate target 11 times during 2001 from 6.5% to 1.7%. What happens जब उन्होंने अपने पास पैसे कम रखने शुरू किए? What happens? Money growth rate में इजाफा हो गया, मनी ग्रोथ रेट इंक्रीज्ड. जब मनी ग्रोथ रेट में इजाफा हुआ तो इंटरेस्ट रेट में कमी वाक़ई हुई, राइट? सो गवर्नमेंट, यूएस गवर्नमेंट, in order to cover those shocks, responded and adopted both fiscal policy and monetary policy. Fiscal policy में क्या किया उन्होंने? टैक्स में कमी वाक़ई की और न्यूयॉर्क को स्पेशल एड दी, राइट? नंबर टू, मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी में क्या किया कि फेडरल बैंक ने अपने जो फंड्स थे, फेडरल फंड्स थे, उसका टारगेट जो है वो कम कर दिया फ्रॉम 6.5% टू 1.5%। जब टैक्स का उन्होंने अपने फंड्स का टारगेट कम किया तो मनी ग्रोथ में इजाफा हुआ और उससे इंटरेस्ट रेट में कमी वाक़ हुई। तो these were the two policy actions that were taken by US government to cover up or to get rid of those economic slowdown or those shocks. What happens? What is happening now? In the first quarter of 2000, real GDP grew at an annual rate of 6.1%, according to the final figure released by the Bureau of Economic Analysis on June 27, 2002. So, what happens after that? उसकी outcome क्या हुई उन policy actions की? कि real GDP में इजाफा हो गया 6.1% तक, number one. And number two, however, its new releases of June 7, 2002, the NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research, Business Cycle Dating Committee had not yet determined the date of the true in economic activity, though it acknowledged that the economy seems to be picking up, right? So what happens, what was the result of those policy action कि आपकी उनकी जो US economy की GDP है वो उसमें इजाफा होना शुरू हो गया and it rose up to the 6.1% level. So what is the Fed or the central bank policy instrument? Now what the newspaper says, the Fed lowered the interest rate by 1/2 point today. What actually happened? हुआ क्या? Result क्या हुआ? The Fed announced expansionary monetary policy, money supply को बढ़ा दिया to shift the LM curve to the right side until the interest rate fell to 0.5%. The Fed target, the federal fund rate, it announces a target value and uses monetary policy to shift the LM curve as needed to attain its targets rate, right? So federal bank ने, central bank ने money supply में इजाफा किया और उस वक्त हद तक इजाफा किया कि जब इंटरेस्ट रेट 0.5% तक में कमी वाक़या नहीं हो जाती और एलएम का राइट वर्ड शिफ्ट हो गया ड्यू टू इंक्रीज इन मनी सप्लाई, और इन दिस वे दे हैव अचीव्ड देयर टारगेट रेट of funds with the central bank. Now what is the Fed policy instrument? Why does the Fed target interest rate instead of the money supply? Why does the federal bank and central bank target interest rates instead of the money supply? Why the federal bank has targeted interest rate instead of money supply? There are two reasons. Number one, they are easier to measure than the money supply, because interest rate easy to calculate, easy to measure than money supply. So that was the reason. The target of the federal bank to overcome the economic slowdown was to reduce the interest rate. The main reason was selecting the interest rate instead of money supply, that they are easier to calculate. Number two, the Fed might believe that LM shocks are more prevalent than IS shocks. So if so, then targeting the interest rate stabilize income better than targeting the money supply. तो वो ये उनका ये कहना था, जो पॉलिसी मेकर हैं, द सेंट्रल बैंक के जो लोग हैं, वो ये कह रहे थे, सिंस दे बिलीव दैट LM shocks are more prevalent than the IS shocks, so then targeting the interest rate stabilize the income better than targeting the money supply. So these are the two reasons. Because of these two reasons, Fed targeted to reduce the interest rate instead of targeting the money supply. So this was a case study. So we have discussed the case study of US economy, and that was in particular year 2000 and 2001. And we have seen that there was IS shocks, there was LM shocks, and how the government or the policymaker responded by adopting monetary and fiscal policy and then recovered from those shocks. Now we'll try to drive the aggregate demand curve by using the IS and LM model. That is the second part of today's lecture. First part में मैंने जैसे बताया आपको कि हमने discuss किया कि how IS and LM shocks or the shocks in shocks can affect the macroeconomic variable, which is the rate of interest here and the income level in the economy. Now second thing, दूसरी चीज़ जो हम सीखना चाह रहे हैं आज के lecture में, that is about how we can use IS and LM model and drive the demand curve. So far, we have been using IS and LM model to analyze these short-term fluctuations, a short-term time period when the price level is assumed constant. However, a change in P would shift LM curve and therefore affect Y. अभी तक जो हमने एनालिसिस किया उसमें हमने ये कहा कि ISL मॉडल को जितना भी एनालिसिस किया and we assume that the time period is short run where prices are fixed, but the change in price level, whenever the change in price, there is a change in price, this will shift the this will shift the LM curve, because you know the demand for real money balances and supply of real money balances is divided by P. Money supply is divided by P. So whenever there is a change in price, this will shift the LM curve leftward or rightward. So the aggregate demand curves captures this relationship between P and Y. So when we say that prices are not sticky, prices are not constant, then aggregate demand captures this relationship between prices and output or income level in the economy. So by using the IS-LM model framework, we can drive the aggregate demand curve of the economy. Now we have two diagrams, A and B. First diagram, if we have original IS curve and LM curve, where rate of interest is I1 and R1, corresponding to this point, we have a point A. Corresponding to this point, we have a corresponding point A in diagram B, where we are expressing the relationship between prices and income level, P and Y, P on y-axis and Y on x-axis. Now suppose prices goes up, what will happen? The money supply will come down, MP over P will go down, and LM curve shift rightwards, right, from LMP1 to LMP2, and the money market and the economy reach at an equilibrium at point B at higher rate of interest and lower level of income. Now when prices goes up, output में कमी वाक़ई हुई. So we have corresponding to this point, we have another point, point B. Now if we combine these 2 points, we get an aggregate demand curve. Now if you look at this left hand side of this slide, the detail is given. Initially prices goes up, M or P goes down, LM curve shift leftwards. With the left shift in LM curve, the rate of interest goes up, investment में कमी वाक़ई हुई और income में कमी वाक़ई हुई. Corresponding to this decrease in income level due to rise in prices, we have another point, point P in diagram B. इन दोनों points को अगर आप मिला देंगे तो आपके पास aggregate demand curve आएगा, and this aggregate demand curve is derived from IS-LM model. Now we'll see that how monetary policy can affect the aggregate demand curve in the economy. We have two diagrams. पहले diagram में rate of interest और income का relationship है. We have IS curve, we have LM curve, and both of these two curves intersect at point A, and corresponding to this point we have aggregate demand curve AD1. Now suppose if money supply goes up, what will happen? LM curve shift rightwards. जब money supply बढ़ेगी, LM curve rightward shift होगा, rate of interest में कमी वाक़ई होगी. जब rate of interest में कमी वाक़ई होगी, investment में इजाफा होगा, कि हमें मालूम है कि rate of interest का और investment का inverse relationship है. जब rate of interest में कमी वाक़ई हुई तो क्या हुआ? इन्वेस्टमेंट में इजाफा हुआ, इन्वेस्टमेंट में इजाफे के साथ इनकम में इजाफा हुआ, और economy reaches at a new equilibrium point R2 Y2. Now due to this increase in money supply, aggregate demand curve shifted rightward. Now if you look at the price remains same, it's P1, but the income level has increased from Y1 to Y2 in diagram 2 because of the increase in money supply from M1 to M2. Now So that was the effect of fiscal policy on aggregate demand, monetary policy on aggregate demand. Now we'll see in this slide, we'll try to explain how change in fiscal policy variables affect the aggregate demand. उसी तरह we have two diagrams. पहला diagram we have ISLM model, and second we have aggregate demand curve. Corresponding to IS1 LM1 we have R1 combination, R and Y1 combination of interest rate and income, and corresponding to this point we have aggregate demand curve 1 in diagram 2. Now suppose if the government adopts expansionary fiscal policy. By expansionary fiscal policy means if the government increase purchases, increase in G and decrease in taxes, what will happen that this increase in G or decrease in taxes increase consumption. जब consumption में इजाफा होगा तो overall IS curve जो है rightward shift होगा. When there is a shift in IS curve rightward, the income level जो है उसमें इजाफा होगा और rate of interest में भी इजाफा हो जाएगा. जब income level में इजाफा होगा, price level will remain same, aggregate demand जो है rightward shift हो जाएगा, और at the same price level income has increased from Y1 to Y2. अगर तो what we can conclude that अभी हमने देखा कि how monetary and fiscal policy can affect the aggregate demand in the economy within the IS and LM framework. तो हमने ये देखा कि whether the government adopts monetary policy or fiscal policy, this affect the aggregate demand in the economy. हमने ये देखा कि अगर एक money supply में इजाफा होता है, if there is increase in money supply, then this will affect a change, bring a shift in the LM curve, and this accordingly shift the aggregate demand curve. हमने ये भी देखा कि if the government adopt fiscal policy, a tool of fiscal policy which is the government purchases and taxes, अगर government purchases बढ़ाती है या taxes में कमी वाक़या करती है तो उससे IS curve rightward shift हो जाएगा, इनकम में इजाफा होगा, रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट में इजाफा होगा, और दूसरे डायग्राम में एग्रीगेट डिमांड कर्व जो है राइटवर्ड शिफ्ट हो जाएगा, वेयर द प्राइस लेवल रिमेन सेम एट P1 बट इनकम हैज इंक्रीज्ड फ्रॉम Y1 to Y2. Recall what we have learned in chapter 9, the forces where we have combined ISLM and aggregate demand, aggregate supply in the short and long run. The forces that moves the economy from short run to the long run is the gradual adjustment of prices. So basically the force that moves the economy from short run to the long run is the price level. अभी जो objective था aggregate demand का डिस्कस करने का ये था कि अभी तक जो हमने IS और LM मॉडल में हमने देखा उसमें हमने ये देखा है there are shocks, there are fluctuation in the short run, but prices are exogenous are given, but if prices are flexible, right, so then the only force that moves the short run to the long run is the price or the changes in price. We have seen this summary in the chapter 9. हमने 2-3 लेक्चर पहले इसको डिस्कस किया था, दोबारा हम इसको डिस्कस कर लेते हैं, रिपीट कर लेते हैं. We have two columns here. In the first column is the short run equilibrium, and then over time when the price level will change, there is a change in the price level and there is a long run equilibrium. In short run equilibrium, in the short term period, when actual level of output is greater than the equilibrium level of output, what will happen? Prices will rise. When prices will rise, क्या होगा? डिमांड चीज़ों की कम हो जाएगी. जब डिमांड कम होगी आउटपुट कम हो जाएगी, आउटपुट कम होगी इन्वेस्टमेंट कम होगी, प्रोडक्शन कम होगी, और इनकम जो है वापस अपने वाई बार लेवल पे आ जाएगी, राइट. And if in the short run actual income Y is less than Y bar, then P will fall. जब actual income equilibrium income से कम है तो प्राइस में कमी वाक़ होगी, चीज़ों की डिमांड में इजाफा होगा. जब चीज़ों की डिमांड में इजाफा होगा, इन्वेस्टमेंट ज़्यादा होगी, प्रोडक्शन ज़्यादा होगी, आउटपुट ज़्यादा होगी, इनकम ज़्यादा होगी, और वापस जो इकोनॉमी है जो मूव कर जाएगी टूवर्ड इट्स इक्विलिब्रियम लेवल ऑफ इनकम विच इज़ वाई बार. So when Y is equal to Y bar, then prices remains constant, right? So price is the only variable in the long run which can establish the equilibrium in the economy back to its natural level of income. Now, after discussing this short run and long run phenomena, now we'll try to explain the short run and long run effects of an IS shock. So what will happen if there is IS shocks? What will happen in the short run? What will happen in the long run? We have two diagrams. In the first diagram, we are taking interest rate on y-axis, income on x-axis. We have IS curve, IS1, we have LM1 curve, then we have long run aggregate supply curve, right? In diagram 2, we have on y-axis we are measuring prices, on x-axis we are measuring income, and we have aggregate demand curve 1 and long run aggregate supply curve. We have initial price level P1 and income level Y bar. Now, IS shock could be positive as well as negative. Now, suppose if we talk about a negative IS shock, what we mean by negative IS shock? By negative IS shock means the government purchases goes down, taxes goes up. जब government purchases में कमी वाक़ई होती है या taxes में इजाफा होता है, तो there is a negative IS shock. IS curve will shift inwards from IS1 to IS2. Now this new IS curve is intersecting the original LM curve at another point, right, where income has gone down from Y bar to, suppose you can say, suppose it has come down from Y bar to Y1, right? So Y1 is less than Y bar. We have reflected this point. जब income में कमी वाक़ई हुई due to this negative IS shock, so what will happen to the aggregate demand curve? Aggregate demand curve will come down from AD1 to AD2, right? So corresponding to this Y1 level, we have Y1 output level here. Right? Now a negative IS shock shifts the IS curve and AD curve to the left, causing Y to fall. In the new short run, equilibrium Y is less than Y. So what we have seen, what we have observed by this negative IS shock की वजह से क्या हुआ? What we can feel, what we can observe is that Y is less than Y bar. Actual income is less than Y bar. तो क्या होगा long run में? Over the time, when Y bar is less than Y, when Y is less than Y bar, prices start falling. जब prices में कमी वाक़ई होगी तो चीज़ों की डिमांड बढ़ जाएगी, right? जब चीज़ों की डिमांड बढ़ेगी, चीज़ों की जब डिमांड बढ़ेगी तो आउटपुट ज़्यादा होगी, प्रोडक्शन ज़्यादा होगी और इनकम वापस आ जाएगी. तो which causes short run aggregate supply curve to move down. Short run supply curve नीचे आ जाएगा, right? And causes M over P to rise, to increase. मनी सप्लाई में इजाफा होना शुरू हो जाएगा, right? यानी शॉर्ट रन सप्लाई कर्व नीचे हो जाएगा, कम हो जाएगा, राइट? और हम वापस उसी वाई बार पे आ जाएंगे. अब यहाँ पे देखो, so from where we started, from negative IS shock. When there is a negative IS shock, what happens? IS कर्व नीचे आ गया. IS कर्व के नीचे आने की वजह से इनकम में कमी वाक़ई होगी. जब इनकम में कमी वाक़ई होगी, it has two effects. Over the time, prices will fall down. जब prices में कमी वाक़ई होगी तो उसके दो effects हैं. One on the short aggregate supply curve. Short aggregate supply curve में कमी वाक़ई हो जाएगी. And we comes to a point in diagram 2. Let us call point M, right? So income comes back to its actual level Y bar. In diagram A, on the upper diagram, उसका प्राइसेस के कमी का इफेक्ट क्या होगा मनी डिमांड सप्लाई ऑफ रियल मनी बैलेंसेस पे कि उसमें इजाफा होना शुरू हो जाएगा. तो सप्लाई कर्व राइटवर्ड शिफ्ट हो जाएगा एंड फाइनली द इकोनॉमी विल कम टू ए न्यू पॉइंट, कम्स बैक टू इट्स ओरिजिनल पॉइंट, वी कॉल दिस the market or the economy come back to its original level of income, which is known as the full employment output or the natural level of output, right? So when we combine these two, short run and long run, price is the only variable or the factor that can bring the output back to its natural level or full employment level of output due to either IS shock, whether it is negative or positive. अभी तो हमने नेगेटिव शॉक की बात की ना, जब पॉजिटिव शॉक की बात करेंगे तो वो क्या होगा? पॉजिटिव शॉक से क्या होगा कि गवर्नमेंट परचेजेस में इजाफा होगा या टैक्सेस में कमी, तो आईएस कर्व राइटवर्ड शिफ्ट हो जाएगा, इनकम में जो है इजाफा हो जाएगा। जब इनकम में इजाफा होगा तो एक्चुअल इनकम जो है इज ग्रेटर देन एम, ग्रेटर देन वाई बार विच इज द फुल एम्प्लॉयमेंट और द नेचुरल रेट ऑफ आउटपुट। तो जब ये सूरत हाल होगी तो प्राइस में क्या होगा? प्राइस विल स्टार्ट राइजिंग। प्राइसेस जब बढ़ेगी तो शॉर्ट रन एग्रीगेट सप्लाई कर्व में ऊपर शिफ्ट हो जाएगा इंस्टेड ऑफ कमिंग डाउन, और LM curve will shift leftward or economy come back to its natural level of output. So in both cases, whether there is a negative IS shock, there is a positive positive IS shock, when we have to combine long run and short run time period, price is the only variable which can start working after the shock and bring the economy back to its natural level of output, which is Y bar. Now this process continues until the economy reaches a long run equilibrium where Y is equal to Y bar. So that is the long run equilibrium, right? So we can combine these two when there are shocks in the economy, whether there is IS shock, whether there is LM shocks. We can combine these two time period and bring prices into the pictures, and in the long run, over the time period, when price start working, economy come back or reaches a long run equilibrium level where Y is equal to Y bar. Now here is an exercise for you, a question for you to practice at home. Analyze शॉर्ट रन एंड लॉन्ग रन इफेक्ट ऑफ डेल्टा एम। अभी जो मैंने आपको बताया, आई हैव एक्सप्लेन्ड इट टू यू, मैंने आपको सिखाया कि किस तरह से इफ देयर इज अ नेगेटिव आईएस शॉक, किस तरह से इफ देयर इज अ नेगेटिव पॉजिटिव आईएस शॉक, हाउ will come back, how economy move from short run to the long run equilibrium by flexible prices। तो इसको हमने सीखा। आपके लिए जो एक्सरसाइज है, आपके लिए जो प्रैक्टिस क्वेश्चन है, जो आपने घर पे करना है, आपने खुद से करना है, we are now, I am giving you question about the LM shock. If there is LM shock and prices are flexible, how the economy come back to its natural level of output. So you need to draw IS and ISLM and aggregate demand, aggregate supply diagram as given you here. Suppose Fed increases money supply, अगर गवर्नमेंट जो है, सेंट्रल बैंक जो है, मनी सप्लाई को बढ़ा देता है, तो what will happen? Show the short run effects on your graph. Number C, show what happens in transitions from the short run to the long run. Number D, how do the new long run equilibrium values of the endogenous variables compare to their initial values? So you are supposed to do this yourself. So this is an exercise, a practice question for you. Now we'll come to the last part of today's class. We would like to know the possible or the reasonable explanation of the Great Depression which came in US back in 1929. Why? What was the reason? What are the explanations? Why there was a Great Depression in US economy in 1929? What happens in that depression? क्या हुआ US इकोनॉमी में? अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट में बहुत ज़्यादा इजाफा हो गया, GNP और GDP में बहुत हद तक कमी वाक़ होगी, और हाउसिंग के बहुत सारे इश्यूज आ गए थे. So there were a lot of economic problems that came in US economy during that Great Depression in the year 1929. If you look in this slide, you can see that unemployment start rising from 1929. It goes up to maybe more than 24-25% in 93. Then it came down to 15%, again goes up to 20%, and then starts coming down after 1937-38. And if you look at the graph of real GDP or real GNP, it came down from 200 billion of US dollar to, you see, it's in 1933 it came to maybe 130, right? Then goes up, then comes down, and then now goes up after 1938. So what are the reasons, what are the possible explanation of this Great Depression in US economy that came in 29? And because of that depression, there was excessive increase in unemployment, massive decrease in income, real GNP of the US economy. There are different hypotheses. First of all, we talk about the spending hypothesis. What is that? Shocks to the IS curve, because whenever we talk about spending, then we're talking about shocks in IS curve, because spending is the component of goods market equation. So when we are talking about spending, we're talking about IS curve. Asserts that depression was largely due to exogenous fall in the demand for goods and services. There was a huge fall, a big fall in the demand for goods and services that shifted IS curve to the left side. And due to this shift in the IS curve to the left side, there was a big fall in income level in the country and the economy. Now evidence kya hua? Output and interest rate both fell down, which is what a leftward IS curve shift would cause, right? So because of that decrease in 1929, one of the reasons of Great Depression was that there was a huge excessive fall in the demand for goods and services. जब excessive fall हुआ, demand for goods and services बहुत ज़्यादा हद तक कमी वाक़या हो गई, तो what happened? That IS curve shift to downward, और interest rate और income में कमी वाक़या हो गई. Now we continue with this spending hypothesis. What were the reasons why IS curve shifted leftward? Why there was excessive fall in demand for goods and services? क्या वजूहात थी जिसकी वजह से डिमांड फॉर गुड्स सर्विसेज में इतनी कमी वाक़ई हुई कि IS कर्व लेफ्टवर्ड शिफ्ट हुआ, उससे आउटपुट और इन्वेस्टमेंट रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट में कमी वाक़ई हुई? क्या फैक्टर्स थे? नंबर 1, stock market crash कर गई. There was a crash in stock market. There was a recession crash in stock market. That crash in stock market brought down consumption down, right? In October 1929, security S&P 500 fell 17%, and then October 1929, December 1993, S&P 500 fell 71% down. So there was excessive fall or decrease in stock market index to 71% between the time period of 1929 and 33. जब इतनी excessive कमी वाक़ई हुई, इतना crash हुआ stock market में, तो उससे consumption में कमी वाक़ई हुई. So this was one of the reason of the shift in IS curve to the leftward. इससे overall income में कमी हुई और Great Depression की वजूहात बनी. Second, there was a drop in investment. Correction after overbuilding in the 1929s. Widespread bank failures made it harder to obtain financing for investment. Investment failed to provide investment to the financer, to the developers, to the investment builders. So because of that drop in investment, there was a shift in IS curve in leftward. Third factor which bring a shift in IS curve to the leftward. It was the contractionary fiscal policy. What we mean by contractionary fiscal policy? Government in the face of falling taxes revenues and increase in deficit, politicians raised tax rates and cut spending. What happens? Politicians ने टैक्स में इजाफा करना शुरू कर दिया, स्पेंडिंग में कमी वाक़या की, और बिकॉज ऑफ दिस रीजन IS कर्व शिफ्टेड राइटवर्ड. तो तीन फैक्टर थे, तीन चीजें थी जिसकी वजह से 29 में IS कर्व यूएस इकोनॉमी लेफ्टवर्ड शिफ्ट हुआ और आउटपुट में कमी वाक़या हुई और रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट में भी कमी है. क्या फैक्टर थे? नंबर 1, स्टॉक मार्केट क्रैश कर गई, इन्वेस्टमेंट में कमी वाक़या हुई, और गवर्नमेंट ने कंट्रैक्शनरी फिस्कल पॉलिसी अडॉप्ट की. एंड व्हाट इज दैट? टैक्स रेट में इजाफा किया और इन्वेस्टमेंट गवर्नमेंट परचेज में कमी वाक़या की. And this is known as the spending hypothesis of Great Depression. Because of that spending hypothesis, that shifted IS curve leftward, और उससे इनकम में कमी वाक़ई और इंटरेस्ट रेट में भी कमी वाक़ई हुई. Second factor of that Great Depression, the reason of Great Depression was the money hypothesis. A shock that shifted the LM curve. What was that? Asserts that depression was largely due to huge fall in money supply. There was a huge fall in money supply. जब huge fall हुआ money supply में, तो what happened? क्या हुआ? LM curve shifted inward, leftward. Evidence: M1 fell 25% during 1929 to 33. But two problems with this hypothesis. There are two problems of this shock, LM shock. One, P fell even more. So what happens? जब मनी सप्लाई में कमी वाक़या हुई तो प्राइसेस में उससे ज़्यादा कमी वाक़या हो गई. तो एक्चुअली M और P actually rose slightly during 1929 to 31. Number 2, nominal interest rates fell down, which is the opposite of what would result from a leftward LM shift. तो nominal interest rate में कमी वाक़या हुई due to the leftward shift of LM curve, which is normally the opposite or in contrast to the leftward shift in LM curve. The money hypothesis again, the effects of falling prices. क्या हुआ जब मनी सप्लाई में इतनी ज़्यादा कमी वाक़या हुई ग्रेट डिप्रेशन के दौरान, तो उससे प्राइसेस में बहुत ज़्यादा कमी वाक़या हुई. दैट asserts that the severity of the depression was due to huge deflation. So why depression was so severe, so worse? That was because of due to the huge fall in prices, more fall in prices than money supply, and that situation is known as deflation. Prices fell 25% during 1929 to 33. This deflation was probably caused by the fall in M, so perhaps money played an important role after all, because inflations or prices comes down and there was a deflation. In what ways does this deflation affect the economy? तो क्या हुआ कि when due to excessive fall in money prices fell हुई, prices में कमी वाक़ई हुई, but that fall in prices was much more than the fall in money supply. So what happens? How that fall in prices affected US economy in that time period? We'll see that now in the next slide. The stabilization effect of deflation: when prices comes down, what happens? M over P goes up. ऊपर क्योंकि मनी सप्लाई में हमने ये कहा कि कमी हुई लेकिन प्राइसेस में उससे ज़्यादा कमी वाक़ई हुई, तो ओवरऑल M और P में इजाफा हो गया. जब ओवरऑल M और P में इजाफा हुआ तो LM कर्व जो है शिफ्ट कर गया राइट की तरफ, तो आउटपुट में इजाफा होना शुरू हो गया. तो दिस वाज ए स्टेबलाइजेशन इफेक्ट ड्यू टू दैट money hypothesis. तो money hypothesis initially there was a shock, LM shock, LM curve leftward shift हो गया right, और उससे इनकम में कमी वाक़ई हुई. But what was the effect of that decrease in money supply on prices? Prices fell down more then the fall in prices, then the fall in money supply. जब prices में ज़्यादा कमी वाक़या हुई, then the fall in money supply. What happens to M over P? M over P में इजाफा हो गया और LM curve shifts to the right side. When LM curve shifted to the right side, money income में इजाफा हो गया. And this is known as the Pigo effect. कि prices की कमी से M over P में इजाफा हुआ, कंज्यूमर की वेल्थ में इजाफा हुआ, कंजम्पशन में इजाफा हुआ और कंजम्पशन में इजाफे के साथ क्या हुआ, IS कर्व शिफ्ट कर गया टू द राइट और इनकम में इजाफा हो गया. तो दिस फ्रॉम दिस LM कर्व, फ्रॉम दिस LM शॉक्स वी कम टू द Pigo इफेक्ट कि ना कि सिर्फ LM कर्व राइटवर्ड शिफ्ट हुआ, IS कर्व भी राइटवर्ड शिफ्ट हो गया और जिससे इनकम में इजाफा हो गया. तो this was the stabilization of US economy after Great Depression due to fall in prices, which was because of the fall in money supply. And when P comes down, overall money supply बढ़ गई आपकी, consumer की wealth बढ़ गई. जब consumer की wealth बढ़ी, consumption में इजाफा और इस कर्व rightward shift कर गया and then income में इजाफा हो गया. The destabilizing effects of unexpected deflation. Debt deflation theory is known as the debt deflation theory. Decrease in prices, if unexpected, transfer purchasing power from borrowers to lenders. कि अगर prices में कमी वाक़या हो and if that fall is unexpected, so what happens? So unexpected deflation इसको कहते हैं, and if there is unexpected deflation and if there is unexpected fall in prices, this transfers purchasing power from borrowers to the lenders. Borrowers spend less, lenders spend more, and if borrowers' propensity to spend is larger than these lenders, then aggregate spending falls and the IS curve shift left and Y falls. Right? So if there is unexpected deflation, तो उसका end result क्या होगा? IS curve leftward shift होगा और उससे income में, economy में कमी वाक़या हो जाएगी. Now, destabilizing effect of expected inflation. So if there is expected inflation, if people are expecting, policymakers are expecting the inflation will comes down, what will happen? Rate of interest will go up for each value of nominal interest rate. जब rate of interest बढ़ेगा, investment में कमी वाक़या होगी. जब investment में कमी वाक़या होगी, because we know that there is inverse relationship between rate of interest and investment. जब investment में कमी वाक़या होगी, planned expenditure and aggregate demand में कमी वाक़या होगी. And then that results a fall in output, that results a fall in income. So हमने देखा कि whether there is unexpected deflation or whether there is expected deflation, in both cases the outcome is that there is a fall in output, there is a fall in income in the economy. Why another Great Depression is unlikely? Why we not think that the US economy is not going to have another depression? Because policymakers now know much more about macroeconomics. They know that what are the macroeconomic variables and how to treat those macroeconomic variables. The Fed knows better than to let them fall so much. They are now clever enough. They know कि मनी सप्लाई इतनी ज़्यादा कम ना हो जाए जिससे प्राइस में बहुत ज़्यादा कमी वाक़या हो जाए. Fiscal policy makers know better than to raise taxes or cut spending during contraction. The federal deposit क्या है? Federal deposit insurance makes widespread bank failures very unlikely. So there are automatic stabilizers now in the economies. Because of those automatic stabilizers, if there is economy is unstable in the short run, those automatic stabilizers start working. काम करना शुरू कर देते हैं, right? And then economy comes back to its equilibrium back, right? So that's why we can say that a depression like 1929 is unlikely these days, because policymakers, both monetarist and fiscal policymakers, are more clever. They know much better than before, right? So this was the last component of our today's lecture. So we have learned about what are the possible explanation of Great Depression, क्यों हुआ, किस तरह से हुआ, and how US government or US economy recovered from that depression, right? So I will try to summarize in a few minutes what we have learned today. So what we have learned today, we started from IS and LM model, and we tried to drive the aggregate demand curve. We have driven the aggregate demand curve by using IS-LM model, and then we see that if M, G and T are exogenous, then P is exogenous in the short run, Y in the long run. Endogenous variable is the rate of interest. उसकी हमने बात की कि interest rate determines the income level in the economy. Then Y endogenous in the short run, P in the long run. Right? So why income जो level है वो endogenous होता है in the short run, कि whenever there is fluctuation, whenever there is shock, so that's affect the income level in the economy in the short run. But P is exogenous in the short run and it is endogenous in the long run, right? It start working, there will be change in price level in the long run. So right, it start working, जब prices काम करना शुरू करती हैं उनमें कमी इजाफा होता है, तो उस long run में economy जो है वापस जो है अपने full employment level पे आ जाती है और income come back to its natural level of output. IS curve basically is the curve that brings equilibrium in the goods market, and we have talked about it. Then LM curve is the curve which brings the equilibrium in the money market. उसके बाद हमने ये देखा कि how the economies can move from short run to the long run, किस तरह से move करती हैं. हमने ये देखा कि in that case prices are flexible and that plays a very important role. तो उसका हमने effect देखा on IS and LM curves as well as on the aggregate demand curve. So when prices are flexible in the long run, then economies move from short run to the long run. Suppose in the short run, if actual income is greater than Y bar or less than Y bar, prices start rising and going down, and then it works, and then economy comes back to its natural level. So this is what we have learned by using together short run and long run with the help of IS-LM model and aggregate demand. Aggregate demand curve जो हमने drive किया, that shows the relationship between P and Y, that is the income level, and there is a negative relationship slope, prices goes up, M और P goes down. जब M और P में कमी वाक़ई होती है, डिमांड फॉर रियल बैलेंसेस में कमी वाक़ई होती है, रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट में इजाफा होगा, इन्वेस्टमेंट में कमी वाक़ई होगी और इनकम में कमी वाक़ई. एक्सपेंशनरी फिस्कल पॉलिसी जो हमने देखी, दैट शिफ्ट द IS कर्व राइटवर्ड, raises income and shift aggregate demand curve rightward. Then we have talked about expansionary monetary policy that shift LM curve to the right side, raises income, shift aggregate demand curve to the right. IS or LM shocks, both ये हमने देखा कि if there is IS shock or LM shock, both shift the aggregate demand curve to the left and right side. And finally, in the last part of our lecture, हमने ये सीखने की कोशिश की कि what were the causes, what about the reasons of Great Depression in 1929. तो हमने ये देखा कि एग्रीगेट डिमांड में बहुत कमी वाक़ई हो गई, आउटपुट बहुत ज़्यादा हो गई थी. The main reason was the fall in demand of goods and services. There was a crash in stock market, investment में कमी वाक़ई हो गई थी. These are the factor reasons of that Great Depression, right? So उसके बाद हमने देखा कि how US economy has recovered from that Great Depression by adopting monetary and fiscal policies. So monetary and fiscal policy are the two important instruments or tools of the government or the policymaker to adopt these tools and to recover the economies from depression and from shocks. तो स्टूडेंट्स, दिस इज़ ऑल अबाउट. आज की क्लास में भी मैंने आपको 2 एक्सरसाइजेज दी हैं. प्लीज़ ट्राई टू डू दोज एक्सरसाइजेज व्हेन यू गो बैक होम. गुड लक, बेस्ट विशेस टिल द नेक्स्ट क्लास, नेक्स्ट लेक्चर. सी यू. अल्लाह हाफिज़.